All right, this is the second part of the Shadowdark campaign diary number 6. Um, in the last episode, I mentioned that I wanted to try something different for this one, see how I like it moving forward. So, in the last video, you got the basically like the narrative side of the session, what actually happened, and basically like from a player standpoint. And now I'm going to go back through that same session from a GM standpoint. Kind of give you the behind the scenes, what I was thinking the whole time, and kind of what was going on. So, if you are anyone besides me, and you are watching these videos, first of all, hello, how are you? You're probably either one of my two players, you're a random friend of mine, or you're just some random person on YouTube who has stumbled across my basically journal videos of this campaign. Hello. To all you people, how did that last session sound? Did it sound fun? Did it sound like a good time? I did not have a good time as the GM. I think it was one of the relatively rare sessions where either the players have fun and the DM doesn't, or the DM has fun and the players don't. I feel like usually it's both. Either have fun or both don't have fun. Or I think a lot of times, like, if we're being real, the GM had fun, but maybe the players didn't have as much fun. I think that's more common than the other way around. I think this is the relatively rare case of the players having more fun than the GM did. Or at least I hope so, because that would mean at least the players were having fun while I was kind of stressed. So why was I stressed? What was going on? All right, let's get into it. Picking up from the beginning of the session. So they finished their little dinner. They had the two like men at arms come up to them in the barracks, and this was what I mentioned before, where I had come up with a piece of like cool lore, not several sessions ago, but a few sessions ago, and I just keep forgetting to put it in front of them. So I was either going to have to like kind of inelegantly dump it in front of them, or I was just going to have to let it go, because it would be ridiculous if things went on much further to like believe that these characters wouldn't have heard this local legend, because it's a pretty big deal. So having the two men at arms do it was I feel like this was kind of my last opportunity to do it. It was already kind of awkward, hence my players being like, we haven't heard about this, like looking at me like, is this a thing we're just forgetting, because it feels like we would have heard about this, and me being like, no. And the way I sort of justified it in world was with by having the two men at arms kind of like looking over at like the swans to indicate that this was something that like the powers that be, the local authorities, aren't really happy with people talking about. And again, that justification makes sense to me. And these are always the two things that I'm asking myself. Is it good for like gameplay? Does it help me accomplish the things I want to accomplish in gameplay terms? Which in gameplay terms, this is me putting a quest, a hook, a rumor in front of the players, which I want to do. And then number two, does it make sense? Those are always the two questions I'm asking myself. And I try to, like, plausibility generally comes before gameplay. Like, if I legit really just couldn't think of a way to put this in front of them that made any sense, I think I would have just let it go. Keep it in my back pocket as an idea for another campaign, which is what we all do. No content goes to waste. We always have it ready once we've come up with it. So, I thought it made sense that people wouldn't really talk about it that openly, at least. Hard to believe still that the players wouldn't have heard about it during all their carousing and stuff. But, I thought it was cool. The idea that there's this huge diamond that is not only worth, tons of money just by being a huge diamond, but also has all of this, like, local importance. It would be a huge deal to the local authorities if you found this thing and returned it to them. I like that it gives like a high level thing to sort of aspire to. Like, if this is a thing that if they wanted to, like, they could make the whole campaign about this. Like, we want to find this gem. Although that I think that would probably lead to some of the same problems that were plaguing me for this session. Hopefully I can explain well what I mean by that. But yeah, I thought it was just a cool thing, a sort of thing to aspire to in the area. Like that's what the campaign could become about if they wanted to. And I like the lore. I like the local. I always love like local history, especially like recent history. Like stuff that happened a long time ago is cool. But I always think that the stuff that happened like just within a few generations is like really cool to learn about. Hopefully my players feel the same way. So did that little lore dump for them, Then they head out. Again, with like, some sort of abstracted information that they have received from people at the keep about like, oh, these are some, these are like the usual operating habits of the orcs. Like, here's the layout of the local area. Here's where they maybe probably aren't. Here's like some good ambush spots or whatever. So they're heading north, which I've indicated that basically the further north you go, the more into orc country you go. And as the session goes on, and the players simply keep going north, this was kind of like the crux of the problem. Although the crux of the problem might actually have just been putting this orc bounty thing in front of them in the first place. And let me do kind of my best job I can of like explaining this whole dynamic and why I didn't really like it, why I was kind of scrambling and not really having fun throughout the session. So this was a session where I felt prepped, like I felt ready to go. And that's always super important to me. Like I'm generally pretty comfortable improvising. I think a lot of the best like gameplay happens when the GM's kind of on their toes along with the players and things just like happening and like everybody's coming up with stuff together at the table. But there are some times like this one where I just feel unprepared. I feel like I'm scrambling. I feel like I don't have good answers or good solutions to the things that the players are wanting to do or like the questions that they're asking. And this was certainly one of those cases. So giving them this bounty in the first place, I didn't anticipate, which, mistake number one right there. I didn't anticipate that they would literally make this bounty the thing that they wanted to do. In my head, I thought of this bounty as just like a thing you would do basically while you're doing other things. So like you're in the orc area, you're here for some other like hooks and rumors. As I've said, there's the Lost Citadel of the Scarlet Minotaur, which is the starter adventure for Shadowdark, which I'm eager to run. I've read it. It looks really cool. It looks fun. So I've been dropping hooks and rumors in front of them about it to hopefully like nudge them there. And then there's also the other adventure in this area at the lake with the waterfall, with the weird howling at night where like the patrol went missing years ago. That's an official adventure from Shadowdark called the Wavestone Monolith. It's for level 3 characters, which the party is level 3 right now. So I figured, okay, we're out here doing either the Wavestone Monolith or we're doing the Lost Citadel adventures. And while we're out here, we're in orc country. So we'll either run into some orcs just coincidentally, or we could do like a little bit of hunting while we're out here to get some of this bounty. That's not what the players did. The players focused on this bounty as the thing to do, which makes sense. In hindsight, again, I should have foreseen that as a very good possibility because bounties are fun. Like when we play video games, I think like bounties are some of the funnest things to do because they're simple. Like people like to have clear goals. And fighting and killing shit is fun. Anyway, that's like, a big part of why we play games like D&D or Shadowdark. So going out, hunting things, fighting them, killing them, and then getting paid for doing it sounds cool and is fun and is awesome. So I should have foreseen that this was a high possibility. And I feel the same way when I run D&D. I think stuff like this that's like very open-ended and is basically just like you traveling around, like, oh, like let's just keep wandering around this area, or let's just sit here in an ambush spot and wait for enemies to come by. I just really struggle like making these sorts of adventures interesting. And I know that a lot of people talk about how making travel interesting is a problem and it's hard. And a lot of people just fast travel, like skip through it. Maybe you just do your encounter checks and it's like, okay, well, you travel all day through the woods. In the afternoon, you have an encounter with this thing. And then you travel the rest of the day after the encounter and then you get there. And it's a pretty, like, from what I've read other people say, both like from the OSR spaces and from like modern D&D, it seems like a fairly intractable problem where a lot of advice is just like, dude, just skip it. Like if you really can't think of interesting, relevant things to happen on the way from one place to another, just say that they get there. And, that's probably just the correct thing to do from a gameplay standpoint, but I'm stubborn, and I really like travel stories. I mean, Lord of the Rings is my favorite piece of fiction, period. Also, like the Wheel of Time series, where, especially in the first book, it is a travel book. Like, it is a small party of people having adventures while they travel a huge distance. And that Wheel of Time was also one of the big formative, like, fantasy texts in my life. So that's, that's a big part of how I think about fantasy and adventure, is the travel. And seeing cool things as you travel, having encounters with cool, weird, dangerous things. So, and Shadowdark helps a lot to make travel interesting just because they have a robust, like detailed, procedure-driven travel system. And just giving some structure to it helps a lot. So that whole kind of dynamic I just described was one part of the big problem that was stressing me out, because once I saw that this is what they were like focusing on and this is what they were going to do, like, which I already knew, but leading into like the kind of second part of the equation is, for some reason, I just didn't in my head think that they would just keep traveling north, that they would just keep going deeper into Orc country. Which again is a thing I should have foreseen. Like, I figured they would probably just set up somewhere and just wait in like an ambush spot for them to come by. Now, I did tell them that if they did that, depending on how far north they'd gone, they would probably have to wait, like it might be like a multiple day thing of just like waiting for orcs to come by. So that probably actively discouraged them from staying south, actively encourages them to go north. So they just kept going north, which I didn't anticipate them doing. Again, which was foolish, because if all you want to do is hunt orcs and get bounties, obviously there's a very good chance that you will just continue to go north, because I straight up told them, like, the further north you go, the deeper into orc country you get, and the higher the likelihood is that you will encounter orcs. And they don't want to just sit around doing nothing. They want to have fun. They want to do stuff. So, of course, they continued north. And it left me with like not really knowing what to do besides just saying, okay, you keep traveling and we'll just keep making encounter checks, which is not like very fun, I think. Again, I feel like the players seemed like they enjoyed the session and had fun, so maybe it was more fun than I felt like it was. But it just didn't feel great. And then they also, they got far enough north that they started kind of bumping into like the invisible wall. Like, uh-oh, I haven't really prepped like what you guys are going towards. So like, oh shit, I kind of need to come up off the top of my head with like what's going on up here. Now, starting to get like ahead of where we actually are. But this was sort of the point where that dynamic came into play and became relevant. So I wanted to sort of describe the gist of what was going on. But back to what they were actually doing, they take the road up north. They pass the Scarlet Minotaur, the Citadel. I had some cool pictures to show them for that. There's a place in Jordan, I believe, called Petra. These are very ancient ruins. And when you look at the pictures of it, like, it's perfect for the Lost Citadel. It's this, like, red stone. You can look it up on Google. It's really cool. It's this, like, red stone sort of, like, temple monument. I don't know what its original purpose was, but it kind of looks like a temple. Like, big, like, columned, pillared buildings built into the side of like this big like redstone mountain. It's cool. It's cool as hell. It's one of those things when you see it, you're like, God, I can't believe stuff like that actually exists and that they built that shit thousands of years ago. It's awesome. I showed that to them. And like this area, the Lost Citadel area, this was kind of another example of me like owning myself, like actively making it harder for myself without realizing what I was doing. Where I told them, and I had the Castellan and like other people had to tell them, that at this citadel, the road forks, goes north and south. And I told them that the southern road is infested with harpies. And the Castellan told them, like, don't go that way. As far as we know, there's harpies, like, infesting that whole road. So, I didn't want them to go further north, and yet I literally closed off the alternate route to go, like, a different direction. It's like, cool, Dave, what are you doing? Awesome way to just like work against yourself. So they pass this Scarlet Minotaur area, that eventual location. They continue up north, which is where the road sort of broadened out into like a small valley with like a proper sort of like forested feel because there's a lot of evergreen trees in this valley. I had, it's sort of like a calm, like a Bob Ross painting, calm, peaceful area. This is where the Wavestone Monolith adventure was located. And I described them as like being able to hear in the distance, like the fall of the waterfall. And where they camped, and they had stopped a little bit early in the day, so they were able to scout around the area. And I described them coming across, the lake and the waterfall, and they saw the crystal clear water, the little pool, a large pool, small lake, whatever. The waterfall feeding into it. Obviously, I wanted them to go there. I was kind of worried about them going there because while it's a third level adventure, it has a reputation confirmed by Kelsey Dion, the creator of it herself, that it kind of punches above its weight class. Like, it's fairly difficult for a third level adventure. And reading it, I can see why, for one specific reason that we'll get into. But, it's a nice self-contained piece of content that's very easy to run, as all Shadowdark content is. And I think Shadowdark kind of works the best when you're dungeon crawling. Like, it's literally what the system was designed around. even though they do have a lot of like procedural stuff for like traveling and camping and all that. It is fundamentally, I think, at the end of the day, a dungeon crawling game. So I wanted them to go there, but, you know, other than just repeatedly mentioning it, I wasn't gonna like railroad them to it and like force them to go there or the Lost Citadel, you know. And then they made camp for the night. They had 2 watches. The PC Gritz took a watch first shift, and then Calliope, I'm going to start using her name, Calliope, the Elf Ranger, took the second watch. Gritz failed his check for the watch. I think he rolled like a 9, maybe even lower than a 9, because if it was a 9, at least that is the easiest difficulty. That is a difficulty. So if it's a 9, I think you would at least partially succeed. But I think he rolled an 8 or lower than 9. So he just straight up failed at his watch. And then Calliope, the ranger, rolled a natural 1 for her watch. So what I did mechanically to represent how poorly their watches went is I basically rolled extra die for the encounter checks so that they had an increased chance of encountering something. And this is something I probably want to come up with like an actual system for, as far as like the keeping watch stuff. Like if you fail a check for keeping watch, like what does that mean? I think that's something that a system can be easily made for, and I think it's worth making a system for it. And I don't think it would be too like rigid. Like, I think it's fairly easy to say like, oh, you know, you roll 2 dice for your random encounter check instead of 1. Or if a random encounter check happens, I don't know, like players are surprised for 2 rounds instead of 1 or something like that. I don't know. But regardless, they made it through the first watch without spiking an encounter. But then for Calliope's natural 1, dude, I think I literally rolled like 4 checks instead of 1. Because it's like, you rolled a nat 1. That's bad. As I've said before, nat 1s and nat 20s always mean something the way I run the game. And the players have come to expect that. So she spiked an encounter. It was the Canyon Ape that came charging in from them out of the darkness of the forest. I think I did a pretty good job, like making it creepy and like describing it in a frightening way. This was another instance where I literally, after I did my own kind of description, I literally read the description from the stat block to the players, because again, the writing is so fucking good and it perfectly does what I want it to do. And I think, yeah, when the players were like, ooh, yeah, I'm like, creepy. Now, I had looked at this stat block before. You know, you always have a different perspective when you're looking at things like from a theoretical standpoint ahead of time versus when you're looking at them in the actual table. And when I looked at this thing again at the actual table, I was like, oh shit, this thing is nasty. The way I was looking back and forth between the 2 players, like I was like legitimately frightened. You know, I try not to pull punches, but I don't want to kill my PCs. I really don't. I think it's a weakness of mine, if I'm being honest. I guess I'm kind of a softie at heart, which is funny. But yeah, I don't like the idea of killing them. And yeah, when I was looking at this thing, when I looked the stat block and then I looked back up, like back and forth between my players, I think my wife was like, "What? Like what?" And I'm like, nothing. It's fine. It's fine." You know, I think I indicated in some way that like, oh, this thing is kind of nasty, actually. Because, you know, I always think if the players are in a very dangerous situation, they should have some way of knowing they're in a dangerous situation. And you can either do it narratively with like spooky, you know, drop the tone of your voice, speak slowly and evocatively, and, you know, impart it to them through your presentation that this situation is deadly. Or you could just tell them. Just be like, you guys... like either above the table like I did, where it's just like, oh god, this thing is pretty tough, or you could say like your characters, you just know, you can perceive that this is extremely dangerous. So yeah, I always do that in some way or another. This time I was just like, oh my god, this thing's tough. Like as a DM to the players, this thing is hard because it had. I don't think its AC was that high. I think it was like a 12 or 13, which is, it's decent for Shadowdark. Its hit points were like fine, like relatively high, but not crazy. But it had 3 attacks around, plus 6 to hit, which is quite high for Shadowdark, and then 2d6 per attack. So this thing can just like drop people. Like one round of attacks will like easily drop, I think, any player in this party, or at least has the potential to. I mean, 2d6, that's an average of 7 hit damage, and it attacks 3 times around, so with a plus 6 to hit, so it's likely to hit. So, I mean, it's whipping out 21 points of damage around if it hits all 3 attacks. But they got relatively lucky. First of all, the players were rolling quite well. They were hitting it and doing good damage to it. As I mentioned in the previous video, the priest's first attack on it was a max damage, 6 damage, which that also helped because it distracted the ape to attack the priest. And this thing's special ability basically was that it did double damage to surprised characters. So it's a very good thing that the priest rushed up and got in its way and got a good whack on it. Because otherwise it was beelining straight for Calliope, the ranger who had been on watch. I'm sure it would have murked her. But Grits got up in its face, took a couple hits on the first round, and then they got lucky because on its second round it missed all 3 attacks and then rolled a nat 1, so it hurt itself in addition to missing all the attacks. So what I was very worried about ended up being like fine, barely a blip, little speed bump, but it could have gone very differently just based on some die rolls. But slowly learning my lesson that just like D&D, the players can handle more than you think they'll be able to handle. Like you can throw a lot at them, and they'll be okay, usually. So they have their encounter with the Canyon Ape. They continue on the next morning. After on their first encounter check, they find some orcs, which I was sort of like, I wasn't doing the encounter checks at this point straight out of the book, like as written, as I usually do. Because this was a sort of unique situation where not only were they going into more heavily orc-infested territory, but also like they're actively looking for these things. They want to find them. They want to have an encounter. So I was juicing the encounters a little bit, making it more likely, which, I think, again, makes sense logically, but is also good from a gameplay standpoint. My sort of like 2-tier system that I ask myself always. So yeah, like early to mid-morning, they find these orcs. I rolled on a table in the Monster Overhaul back there, which that book is awesome. Again, one of like the great, S-tier products that I've purchased. Just really great. I rolled on a table in that book in the orc section that said, it's called What Are These Orcs Doing? And I rolled on that table. This was the table I told myself I would roll on if the players came upon the orcs. If the players found the orcs, they would roll on the What Are the Orcs Doing table. If the orcs found the players, then there's different tables that are called Where They Find You, which is cool. It's a great way to, okay, so you guys have an encounter while you're traveling. It's very easy to just sort of hand wave, oh, where are you? Oh, you're just on the trail. You're on a trail going through the woods, whatever. But that table has a lot of cool things where it's oh, you're on a narrow ledge, with a great ancient statue overlooking you. Or you're going through a muddy field where like movement is difficult. So it just helps flesh out like the encounter itself. So they rolled on the what are the orcs doing? The result was that the orcs are, they're sort of lazily in like a sort of haphazard camp. I think the description said sleeping, with one orc keeping watch but not doing a good job. And this all made sense to me. It's early morning. I imagine orcs in this world are like semi-nocturnal because they can see in the dark, but I don't imagine them as like fully nocturnal. It's not like they're like sensitive to sunlight or anything, but it made sense that they would still be sleeping at this point in the morning. So there's 7 orcs total. 1 of 6 are regular orcs. One of them is the like tough orc. There's only 2 orc stat blocks in the book. One of them is for a regular orc, and one of them is for like an orc war chief, who is substantially harder than a regular orc. Like I think he's level 4, whereas a regular orc is level 1. So what I did for these sort of like sergeant orcs, squad leader, group leader, basically the ones that are high enough ranking to wear like some insignia, either like skulls or skeletal hands, depending on which of the 2 orc tribes you come across. I wanted these guys to just be like tougher, but not like a full, not like 4 times tougher, not like a level 4 compared to a level 1. So I think what I did for this dude, I just doubled his hit die, gave him 2 hit die instead of 1. So he had like, I think it ended up being a little more than 2, but I think he had like, I don't know, 12 HP compared to the regular orc who has like 5. And then I gave him 2 attacks, and he had a +3 to hit instead of a +2. None of it really mattered. It was like, super one-sided fight. They just like got the jump on these things. The Bard, again, with the Fascinate ability, which is like clearly very strong when dealing with like hordes of low-level enemies, which is fine because it's kind of all the Bard does. She's kind of shitty at everything else. But yeah, short work. I have the orcs. They have an ability in their stat block called Rage, which makes them immune to morale checks, and it boosts their damage for 3 rounds. Both of those things last for 3 rounds. So in my head, I said that they would rage as soon as one orc went down. That makes sense to me. And then also mechanically, I think it helps because it lets the fight, it gets a little bit into the fight, so that their rage will probably last the entire rest of the fight. So yeah, they, like first or second round of the fight, they howl in rage. And, I describe this as like echoing off the walls of the mountains and the valley and canyon. Super loud, very loud. Had the Ranger Calliope afterwards literally say, like, that was very loud, just to make it clear to the PCs that your presence in this area is now known, and you're going further and further north. You can deduce that you're in orc country now, proper orc country. So I think they just indicate that, like, we're okay, we'll continue to be a little more careful, but we're still heading north. They head north, and this is when in my head, I'm like scrambling to think of like what to do. Where does the adventure go from here? So I'm like, okay, well, they're pretty far up there. They're getting close to, like, basically where the orcs actually live. And this is what I was referring to earlier with, like, the invisible wall of, like, this has not been prepped yet. Because up to the north, sort of unbeknownst to the people at the keep, the humans, is, like, I guess, like, the orc homeland, if you want to call it that. It's not like there are thousands and thousands of orcs, so, you don't want to get, like, too crazy with it. But this is the main sort of, like, base of operations of the orcs. Like, this is where they live, is in this valley. And I had showed the map on the last video, where when they go far enough north, which in the grand scheme of things isn't very far. I mean, it's like less than 2 days of travel from the keep, but it's further than the humans go. You will reach another mountain pass, a gap in the mountains. And through that gap in the mountains, there's a big valley within the mountains. Here, let me show it just so we're all clear on what we're talking about here. So yeah, this is where they ended basically. And then up here, you can see that there's this gap in the mountains here. And then this area, you can see it's like a valley within the mountains. They refer to this as the gift. The orcs do. Or Ramlat's gift. Ramlat being the god that they worship. They call it the gift because it is a haven, basically. It's far enough to the north that the humans don't go there. And it's situated in, a large, pleasant, fairly abundant, fertile, fecund area. It's safe. They can live there fairly easily. Which is why it's called the gift. So I knew that they were up there. I knew that that's where the orcs were, but I hadn't really worked out, what's the whole setup? How many are there? What does it look like to get in there? What are obviously they would have some kind of defenses or something, or at least some sentries or keep watch on the mountain pass. Hadn't worked out any of that stuff yet. But, I had to come up with something because they went all the way up there. So, there was the not huge, but I think it was 17 orcs and an ogre, which is, ridiculous. You can't fight that straight up. That'll wipe the shit out of you. Maybe if the bard fascinated all of the orcs, they could manage it, but that big group of orcs goes running by. Wisely, they decide not to fight them. I was like, oh my god, thank you, because that would have just been the end of the campaign, probably. But yeah, they hide. They let the orcs go past. They continue going north. And this is where they bumped into the invisible wall, where I described them coming up. The land sort of drops away in front of them, broadening out into this wide valley running between the two ranges of mountains. Big old mountain pass into Ramlat's gift. And this is where, looking down below them, they can see hundreds of feet down, but placed in a way that makes it unavoidable. You'd have to go through there unless you wanted to do some crazy mountain climbing. Is the wooden keep of the orcs. They can see little figures moving around on there. I describe them as being the size of ants, as far up as they are. This is also where the players got weirdly fixated on wanting to burn the keep down. They're like, oh, maybe we can set fire to it and burn it because it's wooden. They were like, oh, it's wooden, so we can burn it. And this bafflingly led to a 3 to 5 minute debate between me and the two players on can you just burn down a wooden keep? And I'm like, guys, wood doesn't just burn that easily. You can't just toss a torch against the base of a log cabin and just catch the whole log cabin on fire. It's not that easy. They were arguing with me, they're like, well, it's wooden. Come on, it's wooden. Are you saying wood doesn't burn, Dave? Is that what you're saying? I'm like, no, wood burns, but have you guys ever started a campfire? You don't just throw logs on the fire pit and just set the logs on fire, because logs don't burn that easily. They need a lot of heat, to actually properly catch on fire and start burning, which is why you have kindling. The first thing you have to do to start a fire is build up a big base of kindling, so that more stuff that burns more easily creates a small fire and then a bigger fire, and then you can add bigger and bigger things to it. And then you finally, eventually get to adding proper logs to the fire. So I was like, you guys would have to build up a massive pile of kindling at the base of these wooden walls. And then, yeah, you could set the kindling on fire, and then eventually the logs proper would start to burn, and then eventually that would spread through the keep. But, like, this is just kind of ridiculous. It was one of those dynamics where, like, they never really conceded the argument. They were kind of making fun of me to the end of it. Like, oh, I don't think Dave knows how fires work. I don't think Dave knows how wood works. But I think they were convinced by my arguments. It might help that of the three of us, I was the one born and raised in the country. I have started many campfires and bonfires in my day. And I sort of just flex that knowledge on them. Like, oh, I'm sorry, you two city slickers. Who's the person that grew up in the country here? Who's the person that actually started campfires? So when they would say, like, I don't think Dave knows how wood works, I would say, like, I don't think you two know how starting fires work. But again, they never really conceded, but they sort of just gave up. I think, I think they agreed with me in the end, but whatever. It's not really important. It was kind of just, we were all just teasing each other. So they eventually they decided to turn around, like, okay, we can't really, deal with that. We can't, assault this keep, because presumably there's a ton of orcs in there. So they turn around, they start going back down south, and this was another thing about the session that just made me kind of feel like, this session kind of sucks. Like, they just wandered all the way north, bumped into a thing that made them just turn around and go back in the direction that they came from, and they felt like, like there wasn't really other places to go, because I hadn't indicated to them or described other areas they could go or different branches they could take. So they're kind of, it felt like they're just sort of ping-ponging around the very limited walls of this situation that I had set up, which didn't make me feel great. But they go back down south. I feel like they don't really know what they're doing at this point. Like, I don't really know what they're doing at this point. I'm just kind of trying to come up with it. I had to take 3 breaks during this session just to be like, okay, give me some time to think, figure out what the hell I want to do. And, I think I mentioned at one point, you guys kind of took this in a direction I didn't really anticipate it going. And my wife, correctly was surprised to hear that. She was like, oh, really? You didn't see us, going in this direction? Didn't you... she was indicating, didn't it seem fairly obvious that, this is what the session was going to be? And it's yeah. In hindsight, it did seem obvious that this is what the session was going to be. I don't know why I wasn't better prepared for it. Just more of the same dynamic. I'm not really feeling great about how this session ended up. So they go back down south. They come across where the orcs had encountered the ambush of the smaller orc party. They had clearly thoroughly examined the area and then continued south. So the players keep going south. As the day was sort of fading, as the evening was coming on, they're getting close to where their campsite from the previous day was. And they knew that it was not a good idea to be near that campsite because, presumably they hadn't, completely destroyed all evidence or concealed that they had camped there. So presumably the orcs could discern that this is where some people had camped. So they're like, okay, we don't want to camp near there. So they stop a little further north than where that campsite was, which means, given where they were, that they were fairly close to the Wavestone Monolith adventure, the little crystal lake, and with the waterfall. Now, they didn't have to camp there. They were in at least a couple miles wide kind of valley. They could have camped somewhere else. But either because they didn't realize that they could camp somewhere else, they could kind of camp wherever, or just because they knew that this was an adventure that I had prepped and I had mentioned it a few times. Maybe they were just throwing me a bone. They're like, okay, yeah, we'll go over to the lake and camp. for whatever reason, they went over to the lake and camped. I hope they done. I hope they don't. I hope that they didn't feel like that was their only option. Like, okay, well, if we want to camp somewhere besides the where we camped the night before, I guess we have to camp by the lake that the DM keeps pushing us to. I hope they didn't feel like that. But one way or another, they camp by the lake, or they go to the lake. They find a little makeshift raft that's kind of like beached at the edge of the lake. They don't see any signs of like orcs, which they asked about. They're like, do we see any like footprints or anything? I said, no. You don't see signs of anything but just like, small wildlife in the area. Then, making me happy, one of the characters probably guessing that because there was a raft beached at this little lake, little big pool, that that maybe there's probably somewhere to go with that raft, and probably the only place to go is like down into the waterfall. Although I did describe that like there's a stream running off of this lake that continues going south. So I mean that does give them an alternate way to travel. So maybe they'll think about that. I'll have to remember that actually. Just to give them some kind of options in the next session. But yeah, one of the players is like, oh, like, I'm looking at this waterfall, like, do I see anything? And I'm like, well, yeah, it's not totally dark, and it's like, I keep describing it as like crystal clear water. So yeah, I was like, okay, yeah, if you're looking at the waterfall, if you're examining it, you can see that like it goes back in there a little bit. So they take the raft, they go over under the waterfall. The adventure says that there's a dex check when you go under the waterfall, which that all makes sense to me. They have their, which I was happy that at least one of the players failed it. So that, especially one of the player characters, because there is a cool like statue placed down, under the water, which I thought was a cool image, like creepy. So, Gabo gets shoved under the water, pushed down by the force of the waterfall, sees the creepy statue. I, of course, I described the glinting of something shiny. You always got to give him that temptation, especially when it's the loot goblin thief character of the party. Always got to give him that temptation. Like, you see something shiny down there, you want to go for it? Decided not to. Just, a wise decision probably. And then when they get to the sort of black pyramid floating in the middle of this lake, and they get up there, they climb the stairs. The thief narrating that they're checking for traps, so they automatically find the trap that's at the top. It was a trap that if they walk down the staircase into the pyramid without having found the trap, when they hit one of the stairs on the way down, the whole staircase goes from like step stairs into a solid slide, so it would have dumped them down the stairs. And I think there's like a pit that opens up at the bottom. But they found the trap. No worries about that. And then they go into the first room. There's the two ways to go. They go west, which scared the shit out of me, because going west basically takes you to the end. Takes you, like, straight to the end of the adventure. And what's going on in this place is that there is what is called in Shadowdark a brain eater. In D&D, known as a mind flayer. Who, judging by the statues in this place, the masked, tentacled faces and everything, it seems that this is some similar to the dragonfly cult lair in the swamp. This is some remnant of like some old cult shit that's been sort of driven down into the dark corners of the world. And this mind flayer is here, luring or grabbing beings out of the local area, which is orcs. That's kind of all that's out here. That's really intelligent, and there's a lot of them, and they're relatively easy to get. He's been grabbing orcs, and through like a transformation process, he's turning them into like tentacled fossil beasts in furtherance of, whatever creepy weird shit this mind flayer is doing in service of this ancient deity or patron. So the direction they went takes them to a hallway where you go south and you go north. And there's no good options here. To the south is a room of like 10 plus of these like transformed orcs. Orc bodies, but like desiccated, rotten, with the heads of, like nautiloid, fossilized, tentacle creatures. And they're just munching on gross shit. The thief scouting ahead sort of observes them, gets close enough to the room, working with the limited light that they have to sort of see what's going on in there. And they hear the sounds, they can tell there are more in there. So they say, okay, let's pull back and let's check out what's up north. Now this, I was quite scared at this point, because to the north of here is the Mind Flayer's lair. And the room is full of perforated humanoid skulls, orc skulls, presumably. Just full of holes. And this is from the Mind Flayer, digging his tentacles and his clawed, disgusting beak into the heads of all these creatures. Eating their brains. Or maybe it's part of the transformation process. But this room, it's full of skulls. And then there's a curtain from floor to ceiling on the northeastern side of the room. And behind that curtain, meditating on a dais, is the Mind Flayer, the Brain Eater. Now, I think what might have actually kept it from popping off was that they did not realize by my description that there was something behind this curtain. Because, it's a curtain that's just blocking off a portion of the room. But I think they interpret it as like a curtain that was just on the wall. And I think it was partially just like the signal to noise thing where the players are never going to fully pick up what you narrate with words. That's just how things go. It's the same way when I'm sitting in the player seat. It's just difficult to do these translations. And also because I think part of how I described it, where I said that there was a slit down the middle of the curtain, which was me trying to indicate that you could go through the curtain. But I think they interpreted it as we can see through the curtain already. And if there was anything to see there, obviously the GM would describe it to us. So one way or another, they didn't do anything in the room, which is good, because if they had made any noise, disturbed anything, it would have been pretty hard for me to not have the Mind Flayer just come out and attack them. Because, what are the odds that a fucking Mind Flayer doesn't notice that there are things rooting around in the room on the other side of a curtain from it, even if it's meditating or whatever. But luckily, they don't do anything in that room. They leave and they go back into the main room that they entered. And they take the other exit out of there. And this is the hallway that goes down 3 flights of stairs, so down into the room with the dirty green water. Inside this water are 4 giant leeches, which is the black fleshy thing that I had break the surface of the water when they're disturbing the water by throwing things into it. So they know that there's something in there. And then hopefully their experience with pools in this game so far, they also know that there's probably something worthwhile down in this water. because that is where like the treasure hoard of this adventure is. It's down at the bottom of this pool. There's a tunnel that leads off to a vaulted chamber, like a flooded chamber, and that's where the treasure's at. There's a lot of stuff in there. Like they're gonna, if they find it, they're gonna be like, "Holy shit!" And I really hope they do, because that is the treasure in this adventure. There's a couple other things that are worthwhile getting, but that's where it's at, and hopefully they know that. But after sort of poking around with this water, messing around with it, seeing that there's presumably enemies in there, they continue to the south, which is the only way out of this room. And this is where they come up into the big room with these 3 sets of statues that are all facing the statue on the southern wall with its hands cupped before it, like in offering. And the like the tentacled, unmasked face. And this is where Gritz, my buddy's PC, put some stuff, dumped some gold in there. And then I gave him the indication of like sensations of like yearning, like egging you to go on, like desiring more. And he puts a little bit more in there, and I describe the same sensations. And then he's like, okay, and then he just dumps 100 gold pieces in there, which is awesome. That is the exact amount that the adventure specified, was you need to dump 100 gold pieces of value in here to get the thing. And the thing that you get is a fucking wish spell. This statue just grants you a wish. With a cost, but a wish. So, when this player dumped the gold pieces in there, he heard a voice in his head that said, "What is your wish?" And I try to emphasize the word wish. Now, my buddy is not very familiar with the traditions of D&D. I don't think he knew much about it until we all started playing Baldur's Gate 3, and then we all got into D&D together, like a couple years ago. So he doesn't know, like, a lot of the big famous spells that have been famous from, like, way back in the day. Wish is one of the most famous spells in D&D. Now, he might have, he might have still, intuited, oh, I can just wish for anything. You're just asking me straight up, what do I want? And now, this is a perfect example of why I fucking love the way my buddy plays. And it's like, we've talked before about some complications, some tensions that can be created by his devotion to role-playing. But this is an example of, fucking chef's kiss. He's such a great player. He's such a great person to have in a group. I love him so much for making decisions like this. What does he do when an ancient magical statue asks him an open-ended question like, what is your wish? What do you want? What do you want? It can be anything. And what does this guy ask for? What does my buddy ask for? Does he say, I'd like +2 to my strength? Does he say, I'd like to have more HP. I'd like to be tougher to hit. I'd like to be stronger. I'd like to learn a new spell. No, he doesn't ask for any of that shit. He doesn't ask for anything mechanical. He asks a roleplay question. And he asks, where is Wrath Gammon, the patron of his deity, Madeira? Because he had seen this, he had the vision of Wrath Gammon on top of the mountain. And Wrath Gammon, I forgot to mention this before, but one of the things Wrath Gammon said to Gritz in that vision was hoping that one day of Gritz's own choice, he would again ascend this mountain. So, take this boon, fight the forces of chaos. Do not let the forces of chaos unwrite what has been written for you in the covenant, and one day I will see you again at the top of this mountain. So that's what he fucking asked for. He asked for where is Wrathgame. Like, fucking beautiful, man. I think, it's a blessing as a GM, as a DM, to have a player like that. They're great. Now, after they get this wish, the text of the adventure says, you make a DC 18 wisdom check, which, something like this is going to happen. You're not just going to get a fucking wish from an ancient, probably evil deity, patron, whatever it is, without some consequences. So, despite the fact that he's a priest with 18 wisdom, he fails this DC 18 wisdom check, which of course he does. That's very hard to make. And the text says for a D6 rounds, you walk to the next room and you try to drown yourself. I think he only rolled a 2, so there was only 2 rounds for him to try to drown himself, which is really just enough time for him to walk out of the room, to the next room, walk up to the disgusting pool of water, and start trying to drown himself. And I described as when he snaps out of it, as the other party members are grabbing him and pulling him back out. He had inhaled the water. He was only under there for a second or two, but it's he was clearly trying to kill himself by fucking just sucking this water into his lungs. So he's coughing, he's spluttering. This water was disgusting. I described to them as there's 3 pools at the north end of this room, and they're all sort of moving. So of course they go in there and check it out, which hopefully is an indication that they will also check out that other pool of water that has all the treasure in it. They go in there and they check it out. They disturb this thing, which is a orc who's being actively turned into a disgusting shell creature. They find it at the bottom. When they wake it up, it's freaking out. It's in horror. It comes freaking up, sputtering out of this water, and just screaming in terror at the top of its lungs. And now they know what the sounds were, the howls, the inhuman howls of terror coming out of this place. It's these things that sometimes get woken up or get loose or get disturbed during their process and are screaming in horror at what is happening to them. Now, they kill this thing quickly, but it was screaming very loudly in this small, condensed space. So that alerts all the other fully formed orcs that are just on the other side of the wall from this room, in that first room that the players had scouted, where there were a bunch of them in there eating disgusting things. And there's a secret door connecting these 2 rooms. So I had the session end with stone grinding behind them, and as they turn to see the wall opening up, these things are coming pouring out of the room into the room with them. So thought that was a good spot to end it. Very cinematic, dramatic, cliffhanger moment. It's going to be tough. I think it's hard to justify a full-on fight breaking out in this place without the Mind Flayer, being aware of it and coming to investigate what's going on. So I think what's going to happen is they're going to have 2 or 3 rounds, probably 3 rounds, I think. And I'm going to be indicating to them that something's coming, something's getting closer. The psionic evil presence of this thing is so powerful that you can feel it. Because I really think they need to have some kind of telegraph, some kind of tell of how dangerous this situation is. Because, man, this Mind Flayer, woo, buddy, its stat block is nasty. I'm worried. I don't want to, fudge things for them to make it easier. But, man, they might need some kind of help. But I don't know. I think I'm just going to run it straight up. Just going to run the stat block as the stat block. The rolls are the rolls. Their rolls are their rolls. And I think that's just going to be how it is. Hopefully they make it through. It's probably going to be the toughest fight they've had so far. We'll see.